let's be honest, developing anything that sits in time for ages doesn't make any sense anymore in today's fast-changing society. So that's why we should embrace adaptive policy design. I work at the user-centered policy design team at the Ministry of Justice. I am a service designer, and today I'm going to talk about why we should care about adaptive policy making, what it is, what are the principles, and how we've been using it at the Ministry of Justice. The head of profession of the policy profession acknowledged this year that government often looks out to subject experts like unions, like charities, and like societies, and government actually does a very good job at engaging with this sort of stakeholders. But we don't really apply equal levels of efforts when it comes to understanding other people who will also be impacted by our policies, such as users and members of the public. User-centered design isn't news for the private sector anymore, and I'm pretty sure that isn't news for most of you in the room today. But it is news how we can apply that to policy making. So while policymakers usually work from right to left, from drafting policies to establishing processes to then developing services, people usually experience government the other way around. Services, or however a policy will be translated to members of the public, aren't considered until the very last stage. User-centered policy design helps to bridge the gap in between policy making and service delivery. So we try to connect these both spaces and try to make them work more iteratively. User-centered policy design is also referred as open policy making, as in the center of this picture. Open policy making has four main pillars. So open engagement, open to challenge, open channels, and open innovations. Policymakers tend to be really good at tackling this side, so the left side of the image. Open engagement and open challenge. They're really good, they're really experts at sharing ideas with members of the public and informing members of the public or stakeholders about their ideas. However, there's a lot of room still at the other side of the picture when it comes to opening our ways of co-creating with citizens, as well as applying new technology or just digital tools to make government more open in terms of the channels. So, for example, program boards or public consultations or even focus groups are great tools that policymakers use when it comes to open engagement and open challenge. But I wonder if there's another way that we could also engage with citizens in an alternative way to consultations, for example. That would be as an open channel. And in the traditional policy-making cycle, we don't really assess whether a policy idea is actually going to meet the needs of a user until the very last stage. So policymakers usually spend a lot of time thinking about if the solution is going to be politically accepted or if the solution is going to be technically feasible. Will the ministers approve it? Is it legally robust? Or will it achieve value for money? And by doing that, we are actually stocking up a lot of risk until the whole end of the process. User-centered policy design tries to reverse that so that we could start with user needs and then build up from there. So what exactly is user-centered policy design? It is basically developing and delivering policies through applying new techniques, insights, and digital tools so that policy is data-driven and evidence-based. It is using collaborative approaches in the policy-making process so that policy is informed by and meets the needs of users. And it is testing and iteratively improving policy so that policy keeps up with the changes of user needs and it has higher chances of getting effective results. Firstly, applying new techniques. I brought a couple of examples from the Ministry of Justice. If you do take photos of that, I would please ask you not to tweet about them. The first one is how we borrow research techniques like observation or in-depth interviews, and we apply them to policy problems. So in this case, for example, we've got a persona that we've developed for a particular policy that we were working in the prison space. So this is what a persona of a prisoner in the Ministry of Justice could look like. We often develop these profiles of the people impacted, of the people who will be impacted by the policies that we are working on. And personas, as you might know, are usually techniques used by digital product development or by service designers. But in this case, we use them as tools for policy design. Secondly, using collaborative approaches. We use prototypes to probe conversations and bridge the gap in between policy and service design. In this example, our team created a digital induction prototype, which is this one on the left-hand side, which was tested with a few selected young boys in custody. So we are talking about people who are less than 18 years old who are currently held in custody. And the idea here was that we wanted to kind of understand how we could induct these guys in a different way using digital techniques. Some things didn't really work, but others worked really well. On one of the pages, we had this audio pattern, and we used that to read the content of that page. And in fact, that worked so well that the boys actually told us that they would rather have the whole thing, the whole induction, as an audio file. So the team went back to MOJ, and then we redesigned a whole audio induction for young people in custody. This audio induction was designed via MP3 players, and we are now testing this in one particular young offender institute, and that is, as a result, depending on the results of that pilot or this testing, we can then roll it out as a national policy. And lastly, testing and iteratively improving policy. So currently, in most cases, the policy is developed and then launched, sometimes in the form of services, or however a policy is going to be translated to members of the public. And then a couple of years later, that policy is reviewed. Policy follows a very waterfall process in this case. However, iterative policy design would actually look more like this diagram on the bottom of the slide. So we would have feedback loops interacting or just embedded throughout the policy review process. So far I talked about what is policy design and some principles of it, and also why does it matter. And I thought that it would be helpful for me to bring a case study of, again, a piece of work that we've done at the Ministry of Justice to try and illustrate some of the concepts that I talked about. Just to give you a bit of context, back in 2012, the Ministry of Justice had a bill which was approved in Parliament that removed the number of areas of law in scope for legal aid. Legal aid is the funding available to people who need legal services but can't afford to get them. This means that without the funding, people who no longer qualify for legal aid are struggling to navigate the justice system and struggling to find a solution to their legal problem. And to better analyze the implications of that policy decision, post-implementation review was commissioned. So basically, as I just mentioned, there was a policy development. That policy development changed the rules and the regulations of how a particular service works, and then now, a couple of years later, they're doing a review on that. So it's very much related to that first diagram that I had on the previous slide. Oops, I'm now ruining the surprise. All right, so to follow that review, the Ministry of Justice was quite keen on publishing an action plan with a strategy to better deliver support to people with legal problems. And this is where we come in. So our team was commissioned to look at what is the experience of people with the legal problem. And that's what we did. We went out and we've done research to try and understand what is the journey of people with seeking legal support or legal advice. We've done observation in legal clinics, we've conducted in-depth interviews with legal advisors, and we also surveyed people with the legal problem. We then mapped their experience and we highlighted 5 opportunity areas where support could be improved. This was then presented to the policy team, and the findings were later incorporated into the government's legal support action plan. There, this document does not follow the same structure of the user journey, but when you read it, you can clearly see how the findings, the user-centered evidence that we provided to the policy team was used and helped to shape this publication, as well as the commitments that were made in it. One of the commitments, right at the bottom over there, was that government would undertake a pilot to explore how to better coordinate and signpost legal support services. Let's stop there. Let's just stop and appreciate the fact that government did not say what was the solution that they were going to implement, as like, this is the thing that we are going to do, and this is the thing that we're going to build to solve this problem. I think that it might be a bit weird, but for us it was a massive win, the fact that policy actually acknowledged that they've done some research to understand what are the user needs, and then they thought about what needs to be done. So they acknowledged that signposting is a problem and something needs to be done about it. But instead of just saying straight away what was the solution, they said, well, we need to now do more research to try and understand what is this problem space and how can we find a solution that will then meet the needs of users. So that for us was a massive win. And in fact, I think that this is a lot of what user-centered policy design or just policy design looks like in practice. From that particular commitment, we then started to work with the same policy team on trying to design and inform what an effective pilot for signposting could look like. We done more research. This time we focused on signposting and what that means in the legal support space. For example, this is what signposting actually looks like in a courtroom. And we also visualized some early ideas that we had, and we used this to test, and we used them as like assets to probe conversations with subject experts and legal advisors. These are service ideas, but we use them to try and understand what were people's expectations and needs so that we could take a step back and then think about what the policy goal should be in order to meet those expectations or in order to achieve those, fulfill those needs. For me, this is a lot about what policy design prototyping looks like. One particular idea stood out, and we then did more prototyping around that, and we tested what effective signposting for one particular problem to start with could actually look like. And at this stage, we use, as Cara and Martin mentioned earlier, we use a lot of the gov.uk design system, and this is where we also applied some of our interaction design skills. To conclude, I'm not saying that user-centered policy design is the answer to all policy problems and is how we should be tackling all policy problems. But what I am saying is that policies are more effective when designed and tested with people who will use them and who will be impacted by them, and adapted regularly as circumstances change. Governments around the world have started to build their digital, their user-centered capability, and some of them are also now applying more of policy designing to their teams. In the UK is sort of leading on that, and within the UK we've got Policy Lab, which is part of the Cabinet Office. We've got MOJ, the Ministry of Justice. We've got the Department for Education, Her Majesty Revenue and Customs, and the Department for Work and Pensions. So those are places for you to keep an eye on if you're interested in this. If you're also interested in what I'm talking about, make sure that you check the Open Policy Making Toolkit, which is designed by Policy Lab. And you can also have a look at the Policy Lab's blog, as well as Kara mentioned earlier, you could read more about the work that my team and I do at MOJ's Digital and Technology blog. Thank you.